All right. Welcome back to Apologetics Central. My name is Arne Verster, and today we have a very interesting topic to talk about. Um, I'm joined by Dr. Greg Bitson, otherwise known as Ben,
All
or
right.
rather, I should actually
Back
say
to
Ben.
Apologetics Central. My name is Arne Verster, and today we.
Sorry, Ben, I think there's a bit of a feedback on your
Yeah,
side.
I think I had the link open. I apologize. I think we got it squared away now.
No, it's good.
My
I
bad.
was also checking. I was also checking on my side if it's actually live. So
Yeah,
no
we're
issues there,
live.
man. No, yeah. So as I was saying, we are going to talk about a very niche topic today. We're going to talk about Bitcoin, and I'm joined by. I was saying I'm joined by Dr. Greg Bitson, also known as Ben, but I actually think it's Ben, also known as Dr. Greg Bitson on
Right.
Twitter. Um, yeah, so it's a very niche topic. It's something very new. I don't think it's actually something that people would have expected us to talk about on an apologetics channel or a Christian channel, Bitcoin. But that's what we're going to do today. I think it's going to be very interesting. And to get us started, Ben, why don't you take some time and tell us a bit about yourself and your background and why you like Bitcoin?
Yeah. So I'm first and foremost a Christian. I've kind of as I've gotten older, I've wandered into the Reformed theology camp. I'm a member in a Reformed Presbyterian denomination, and I stumbled into Bitcoin in 2017, kind of right before the takeoff, and that was my first introduction to that. And then after the crash, I really started to dig into it a little bit more. I was already interested in some of those things, some of these principles that we love about Bitcoin. We'll get into later, but then it was after that, kind of reading Seifstein's The Bitcoin Standard and some of these other um, good works on Bitcoin kind of really took off, and I'm all in now. I love love Bitcoin. It's been a fun ride since then. Getting to learn about how the network works and the benefits of it, and then what we're going to talk about today, the dominion of Jesus in all things, in His lordship and everything, and over even Bitcoin. This kind of niche topic that we're discussing today. So that's my background. I work as a project manager as my day job, and then this is my hobby in the evenings thing.
Yeah, I see. So your Twitter handle is Dr. Greg Bitson, right? And I think that's playing off Dr. Greg Bonson. And I
Yeah,
think the description you have on Twitter is you're a presuppositionalist and a post-millennialist and a Christian or something like that. So, I just got to ask, like, is there a reason that you're Dr. Greg Bitson, or is it just that you like presup and you like Bitcoin and then you mix the two, or is there a more fundamental link going on there?
yeah. It was kind of a I I don't know if this is the best way to go to it, but I am those things. I'm a post millennialist. I would absolutely ascribe to presuppositional apologetics. Um, and then the outworking of that was I was in the Twitter space, Bitcoin Twitter, and there's such it's a diverse group, right? If you've spent any time on there, we've got all sorts of people. We've got anarchists and libertarians and all sorts of people. And my cry and what I would love to do is bring this topic to the forefront, that Bitcoin, the ethics of Bitcoin, the foundations of Bitcoin, mathematics, all these basic assumptions that Bitcoin runs on, they're not in a vacuum, right? Like, these things exist, they run in God's world. So it was kind of the tag that Bitcoin runs on the Christian worldview, right? Bitcoin exists in the Christian world. So I would love to see that topic come to the forefront, and for people to start to think deeper, to kind of peel back the epistemological onion of what is the foundation of this thing that we think is good, Bitcoin, and where does it come from? Where does it live in context, in a worldview? So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah,
Bonson, his apologetic work.
I think that's an interesting take that you have on it. I think um, not in exactly the same way, but my thoughts were also kind of um, going the same way when I was writing my recent article on Bitcoin. You know, I got into Bitcoin, I think a lot of the same way that you did back in 2017 when we had that initial big boost. Kind of went away for it for a while, got into it again, start of 2020. And I think the way that I viewed Bitcoin in 2017 has drastically changed. Since then it was just something fun to play with and you can trade a little and that's all it was. But then starting in 2021, I discovered Bitcoin Twitter. I discovered people making these arguments for Bitcoin that it's like some kind of moral good that we need to go and we need to like implement this thing and everything else is trash and you need to buy Bitcoin and Bitcoin is hope and Bitcoin solves the problems and Bitcoin brings people together. And I was like, okay, so there's a bit more going on here. And
Right.
that's when my mind started rolling. And I also, since 2017, I actually started getting into presuppositional apologetics. So I think those two things actually then converged in the few recent months. But yeah, I think we'll get into all that. I think the first item on our discussion point here, I don't think Bitcoin is something that is readily understood by a lot of people. I think a lot of people heard the term Bitcoin being thrown around. So I think we just need to spend a few minutes and discuss what exactly is Bitcoin. Yeah, what would you say, Greg?
Yeah, so it's really tough. It is an abstract concept, and it's difficult to wrap your mind around it. But if I were to give my kind of elevator pitch, so Bitcoin is money first and foremost, and secondly, it's a monetary network. So, and I think one of the better ways to describe it is to compare it against what we currently have. So very briefly, I'm in the U.S. We have the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar is a centralized system. We have an issuer. The Federal Reserve will print and issue money. There was a time in 1971 where, prior to that, where we were on the gold standard, but that is no longer the case. So all our dollars they have this trusted system where we trust the Federal Reserve to be honest with the issuing of the currency. And that trust failed a long time ago, right? That currency, our money, is no longer backed by a hard asset that has limited supply. And now it's really sadly up to the whims of politicians to print and issue the currency and inflates. And so we can get into that. But Bitcoin is the opposite. Bitcoin is a decentralized system that relies on no single point of failure. There's not a third party that's running, organizing, or issuing. And it's open source code, run on the internet. Anyone can download the Bitcoin protocol. And when they do that, they subscribe to all the rules that have been issued on the Bitcoin network. And so when you stray from that protocol, it's kind of like you're no longer playing the game. And how that works is, there's a blockchain when we can transact on the Bitcoin network, and all of those things are held on a ledger that is immutable as it goes back all the way to the first Genesis block in 2009, 2008, when Satoshi Nakamoto released the Bitcoin white paper and coded it up and ran the first implementation of Bitcoin. So it's really a monetary network. We can send Bitcoin across the network, decentralized. All the participants, all the nodes on the network verify all the transactions instead of this one point, this central, Federal Reserve or central bank managing the transactions. So it's decentralized, open monetary system that we can use to transact, and it's sovereign. You can actually hold your own money on the network as opposed to relying on a third party to do so for you.
Yeah. So I think if we want to make it a bit more tangible, it's interesting. A lot of people always say that Bitcoin is very complex, something that's complex to understand. But then I think it was actually on Bitcoin Twitter where I saw this diagram that kind of tries to summarize our current monetary system, and that thing is complex, man. Bitcoin isn't as complex to understand in comparison. But I think to make it tangible, I think you mentioned that you guys have the US dollar, we have the South African rand, and my rands that I do have are stored in a bank account, right? And that bank account is managed by a single entity. which in my case is Standard Bank. And whenever I want to transfer money, I think this is getting a bit complex now, but it's actually not Standard Bank that's doing that transaction, right? It's actually like a transaction provider like MasterCard or Visa that does that transaction. And that is centralized. So the storage of the money and the transaction and the transacting of the money is managed by single entities, these corporate names. Like you have a Standard Bank card, but it's actually a MasterCard or a Visa or something. And then you kind of make use of the services of Standard Bank and MasterCard and Visa to kind of do your buying and your selling. And then they move around the numbers for you.
Right.
With Bitcoin, it's much the same, but it's decentralized, right? Like you mentioned. So that means that there's no single name that controls the system.
Right.
The system is controlled by, well, anyone that runs a Bitcoin node, right?
Right.
Yeah. So what that means then is it's almost impossible to shut down. Because if you want to shut down Bitcoin, you're going to need to shut down everyone, or you're going to need to unplug the internet or something. So it's decentralized. It's verified by a lot of different independent people. So that's how we maintain that the system is I think you mentioned, you said it's immutable going back. I'm looking for a word now. It's true. It can't be falsified. So you can't steal someone else's money. So the things are verified. And yeah.
Correct. I was just gonna say you have the proof of work. We don't have to get into that, but all this hashing power and Bitcoin terms, this computing power that has gone in to secure all the blocks going back, all the transactions that have been added to the blockchain, and all the way back. So the further the blocks go along, the more difficult it is to undo that. You have to, fork this blockchain in order to make changes. So yeah, it is true, immutable, all those things for sure.
And then I was looking for this final thing is I think you mentioned it as well, the fact that in some cases, not always, I think a lot of people actually make use of third parties to store their Bitcoin, but you can actually hold on to your own Bitcoin. Is that right?
Yeah, Bitcoin, a key factor behind it is the cryptography. So, the cypherpunks, right, are credited with the origins of Bitcoin, and that movement kind of even goes back far before Bitcoin. And so something about that is having public and private key cryptography. So if you hold your private keys to your Bitcoin, whoever has that private key is the owner of whatever Bitcoin is, is locked up with your private key on the Bitcoin network. So managing your private key, just kind of like, maybe not a good analogy, but it's kind of like email and password. Your private key is your Bitcoin. If you hold on to that, you can sign messages to prove that you own your Bitcoin, and lock it up on, on like a hardware wallet or any Bitcoin wallet. So.
All right. Yeah, I think that serves as a pretty good introduction, so that the people listening or actually going to listen to this afterwards have a bit of an idea about the context in which we're talking about here. And I think before we move on to our other topics on the list, it might be beneficial to mention to the audience two things that I think is pretty useful when we talk about Bitcoin, and I think this is going to feed well into our next question, especially when we come to the ethics of Bitcoin. But I think Ben, you mentioned earlier that Bitcoin is money, right? And I think a definition of money can be anything that is or that can be used to trade goods and services. Is that right? Would that be a good definition for money, or do you have something else in mind?
Yeah, no, I think I would agree with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then working with that, right? I think in my article on Bitcoin, I mention two use cases that we find in the Bible where money is explicitly mentioned as something that is good, right? I think the first use case is in the New Testament when we see Christians providing help for other Christians by sending money over long distances. So
Right.
let's think about an example where you have someone that might be in poverty far away, and you would like to assist them by sending them ideally food and water or whatever. Now, let's say you live in the ancient world and you have a goat or something. You know, to send that goat over long distances to walk all the way to the person that needs to get the goat for help is a, a big task, right? So if the goat is alive, it needs to get there, it needs to get its own food, someone needs to protect the goat, it's going to get lost or whatever. So it's an issue to get the food to the other person. And even if you were to slaughter the goat beforehand and maybe send the meat over, the meat's going to perish. So you can't get help to the other person, but that's where money comes in, right? So you can actually, at point A, if you have the goat, you can sell the goat for a few pieces of gold or whatever, and then those pieces of gold kind of store the value of the goat, and you can carry the pieces of gold to the other point, give it to the people that need it, and then they can buy a goat of equal value. So you kind of it makes the value of the goat easily transportable. And I
Yes.
think we also saw that in the Old Testament, um, where if someone stayed very far away from the temple, they could actually sell their goods in region A, and they can bring it over and they can buy goods nearer to the temple and then offer that as their offering. So that's a pretty good use of money, right? And then that got me thinking, there are places in the world today where it's not easy to send help to people. It might be because they're living in oppressive places where the governments lock them out of their money or they can't access resources readily. So, how can we send help to them today, given the systems we have available? You can't send them food or parcels because the roads and the runways are controlled by those oppressive peoples. You can't transfer them money because the centralized system kind of locks out those people. You know, their bank accounts are frozen or whatever. So what can we do?
Right.
And that's where my mind got working. And you know, with Bitcoin, you can actually send it to them almost instantly, as long as you know the wallet key, and no one can stop that transaction.
It's elegant and beautiful, and it is. And as you mentioned, it is such an imperative. I know I if you've been in Bitcoin for a while, you kind of used to being like the tinfoil hat guy, where it's like being a Calvinist for the first time, right? You in this cage stage, but yeah, I think it is absolutely imperative that Christians understand the fundamental issue with our current system, like you mentioned. You know, trying to send like remittance payments, like we're seeing in El Salvador, back to your home country, or you have to go through this convoluted mess of a system, and many people that you want to help, they're unbanked, right? So they don't have an official, you know, they're not lucky like me where they can, you know, sign up for a whatever, some, you know, U.S. Bank or Wells Fargo account with a social security number and KYC themselves. But yeah, Bitcoin doesn't have any of that, right? And if you have an internet connection, you know, even if you don't have it, there's ways to send it even over radio sync or satellite, right? There's all these different ways to transact, and it's permissionless, right? You don't need to get the approval of the U.S. government or the South African government, right? You can send value across the world in minutes, in seconds. You know, if you're using the Lightning Network, instantly for near zero fees, and that's going to absolutely change, I think, how we do missions, how we do funding. You know, outreaches, their global outreach to nations that are very hostile to Christians, and getting money to them. Like, this is absolutely a tool of a tool for dominion, right, that we have in our arsenal to like spread the gospel, right? And as you mentioned, we'll get into this, but as you mentioned, that it's not a god or an idol. We don't just love Bitcoin because we idolize money, but really, like, as Christians, this is just another tool that we would have for the gospel to go out, and for the Lord Jesus to be proclaimed as Lord of all and everything. And so I'm super excited. I think there's lots of use cases where Bitcoin could really make a difference. in the world, and protect them from theft, right? The theft through inflation, right? It's if your money is losing value, when the Federal Reserve decides to just print it away, then you can't allocate your capital into the future. It totally messes up the natural signals that go hand in hand in a free market like that. It ruins economic communication. It's just noise in the signal, and Bitcoin eliminates that. It's a benefit in that way for sure.
Yeah. And then also on that point of faith that you mentioned, still sticking on our first topic on what is Bitcoin. If you send Bitcoin to someone, it is impossible. Well, I'm not going to say impossible, but it's incredibly improbable that someone's via guessing your private key going to take your Bitcoin away from you. So
Right.
if I send Bitcoin to someone that requires help in a country that oppresses them for their Christian faith or whatever, the government can't take the Bitcoin away from them. No one can force them to, or I guess you can probably force them to give it up or something, but it's
Right.
just that they can't take it away from you without you actually giving them permission to do so, right?
Right.
So they can lock you up, they can hurt you, they can whatever, but they can't take away the fact that you own that Bitcoin or that fraction of a Bitcoin.
Right.
Whereas if you have money in a bank account, they can take that away from you. They can lock you out of it. They can prevent you
Turn
from
off.
buying like that off button. But with Bitcoin, they can't do that. So it secures what I think in the article, it's almost near infallible property rights. So if you own Bitcoin, it's yours. No one can take it away from you. They can't expropriate it. I mean, even a house, right? There's a lot of conversations going on in South Africa about expropriation of property. So if you have a house, the government can come, they can take it away, but they can't take away your Bitcoin. and that's something that we find pretty attractive, or at least me.
It's crazy. I mean, I'm getting up to speed, but what's happening down there is wild. Maybe we'll chat at another time. I'd love to hear your experience in that. But yeah, exactly right. That Bitcoin is a hedge against your property, even, right? It's even more secure than some of those things, we would say. It's very useful for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I think we can leave that topic here. I think we have a pretty good background now on Bitcoin and some of its use cases. Maybe moving on to the next one, and I think you already touched on this one in your opening, Ben. But and this is an interesting question to ask you since I actually organized this thing. But why talk about Bitcoin, and why specifically talk about Bitcoin on an apologetics or a Christian channel? What would you say on that question?
Yeah, well, it's almost kind of why should Christians care, and I think it's because, like you said, what we kind of mentioned is that Bitcoin does not exist in a vacuum, and I kind of think about like the myth of neutrality, right? That Bahnsen talks about, that there is no fact, there is no atom in this universe, right, that is not under the lordship of Jesus. Like, in him all things are created, and he is supreme over all things. And so when you acknowledge that, then Bitcoin is just another facet in this world. And then it happens to also be a very useful tool. And so Christians should care about that, because it's useful to them, and we can use this as a gospel advance. And then I think B, this is absolutely an apologetic conversation too. I mean, if you're in Bitcoin, and especially if you're into if you understand presuppositional apologetics, there is no topic that is not a segue into the gospel. That was, for me, that was so eye-opening. I think before I kind of understood that, I thought like there was this spiritual realm where, I did my Christian thing, and then there's the secular world, and trying to bridge the gap or get people to come over, and I wanted to share the gospel with them. but it was really difficult to do that. But after understanding that there is no neutrality, right? That theft, morality, all these things are based in the Christian worldview. It's all topics are a segue into that. So if Bitcoin, if someone's talking about Bitcoin being useful for stopping the theft and inflation or whatever, well, theft is wrong because God is not a thief. Like the triune God of the Bible has declared that you shall not steal in his word. And so that's why theft is wrong. And we can go into like a gospel conversation from Bitcoin, right? And so it's just another apologetic item. I don't know what the word I'm looking for. It's a topic in apologetics and a tool that we should know as Christians. So that'd be my take. What would you say, Arnie?
Yeah, so when I was initially thinking about writing that article on Bitcoin, and I'll definitely post it on the comments on this video after we're done. I did some research on whether something that attempts to give a Christian interpretation on Bitcoin has been done before, and I came across this book called "Thank God for Bitcoin." Right? I'm not sure. It looks like you're nodding, so you've heard about that book. Have you perhaps read it yet?
Yeah, I've heard of it, and I think Jimmy Song and some of these, I think Robert Breedlove contributed to it too. But yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that too, because it's like they get so close, but they miss by millions of miles, right? When Christians want to appeal, they kind of want to play that game where we'll do our Christian thing, and you can bring in your religion or your worldview or your philosophy on life, but we all just want to play in this realm. We kind of want to just hope that we all accept that theft is wrong or murder is wrong.
Yes.
But those topics, they have a foundation. Like they're either true because God says them's true, or you have to find a way to justify them in your worldview, to give an account for them. So I'll pass it back to you, Arnie. I think they don't take that approach in that they secede that ground. They give up that ground in the book, and they kind of take a more classical or a practical, pragmatic approach to why we should care about Bitcoin. But you really are sawing off the limb you're standing on when you do that.
Yeah.
Because you've kind of, like, I think you mentioned this in your article, you're almost saying, well, yeah, Jesus really doesn't have much to say here. The God of the Bible, he doesn't really have much to say on this topic, which is not true. I mean, the God's word is dripping with language about justice for the poor and equal weights and measures, versus about your silver becoming dross, like inflation. So those things are very important. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that book when you did your research? What would you say about that?
Yeah, so I initially thought about getting that book as like a way for me to get my mind running on Bitcoin and Christianity. But then I came across a review of the books. I never actually read the book myself, so this is all second-hand or third-hand information. But apparently, in an interview, the authors kind of admitted that the book's entire thesis still holds as long as you believe that theft is wrong. And I think you mentioned that as well. So, I mean, if you're a Muslim or whatever, you're some kind of moral atheist that believes theft is wrong, then that book can work for you, right? So if that is the case, then Christianity as a worldview kind of doesn't contribute much in the conversation. It's just like it gives you a way to affirm, okay, theft is wrong, and then you kind of do your own thing with Bitcoin, and there it goes. But the thing that I was contending in the article is that it goes much deeper than that. I think it's your Twitter handle that says Bitcoin runs on the Christian worldview, right? Yeah, so that's what I was going for. The idea of no neutrality, the idea that everything belongs to Jesus Christ. So that means that if we approach Bitcoin, it's not something that stands separately from the Christian worldview, but it is something that is entirely contained within it.
Right.
Right. And then what I went on doing was, just because something is in creation doesn't necessarily mean that it is permissible, right? So you can
Yes.
kind of you can kind of build this amazing knife that is incredibly sharp, and you can use that to cut your food, and it's a pretty good tool. But you can also use it to kill someone. So
Yeah.
I kind of, and this is very raw food still, but then I kind of took that approach of Bitcoin. Is I said, okay, we have this technology that is built in the Christian worldview that relies on God upholding His creation, so that everything continues to make sense into the future. And then looking at how it works, whether something like this is something that we should abandon or something that can be used, or maybe say redeemed from all the people that are kind of pushing it for a use that kind of exalt man, So,
Right.
um, yeah, I mean, just go through Bitcoin Twitter and you'll see the people. I think there's a website called hope.com, I think run by Michael Saylor, that kind of educates
Yeah.
people on Bitcoin, and
And he
it
doesn't
paints
even mention the gospel on that website. What in the world?
no, nothing. So they kind of take this Bitcoin creation and they say, but this is going to solve problems, right? This is going to give us hope, or this is our hope. And I think Jack Dorsey mentioned that Bitcoin has the potential to give us world peace, or something like that. So they take this creation, they exalt it as something that can solve the problems of the world. But then I say, no, listen, Bitcoin is running on the Christian worldview. It is something that is contained in it, and the Christian worldview paints a different picture than the picture that these people think the world is like. I think
Right.
I think Michael Saylor and these guys, they might think people are generally good, and that Bitcoin, all that it does is it gives us a way to build a better society that's going to fix all our problems.
Right.
But that's really not the case. Um, the
Right.
biggest issue that we need to be solved isn't relating to financial matters, or whatever. The biggest issue that we are sitting with is the issue of sin. And
Yes.
Bitcoin has a certain way of working against sin, but it's not going to solve the issue. Just because you
Right.
trade in Bitcoin, it's not gonna put you in a right relationship with your creator.
Yes.
So that was kind of the idea that I was developing when I was thinking about Bitcoin and the Christian worldview, of giving it the correct interpretation as not something that gives us hope, but something that is a useful tool, and
Right.
something that presupposes the Christian worldview to make the arguments that the people are making when they talk about you shouldn't steal, you should have property rights, and all those kinds of things.
Right. I think it's you. You absolutely nailed it. Like when people want to elevate Bitcoin as the savior of the world, right? I mean, for one, they make a false idol. Um, but the main thing, I guess, as Christians, like we want people to understand if I orange pill someone or get them to come on to the Bitcoin network, I love that. I think it's going to benefit them. I think it'll benefit society, but that is not the ultimate goal. Like in our confession of faith, the chief end of man is to glorify God and enjoy Him forever. God is His chief end is for His own glory. Now that's a kind of a tough one for some people to handle, but it absolutely makes sense, and it is what God has decreed. So like you said, all these things exist in God's world, but God is also, he talks about like the Assyrians, right? Being like an axe in his hand, right? He's sovereign over all these things, good and bad. And so Bitcoin, like you mentioned, can be used for good and bad things, like a razor in the hand of a surgeon, right? Is a good tool. He can save a life, but like in the hand of a thief, right? It's very dangerous and wicked. So we need to find this appropriate place to set Bitcoin in the context of the Christian worldview. like you said, it's not our hope. And so it's crazy when we befriend or team up with these people like in the Bitcoin community. It's almost like, well, wait a minute. Now there's more to this that I want you to understand. I want you to understand that if you want hope, if you want to see change in the world, you need gospel transformation, right? Like secular humanism is what they would push, their hope for the world, which is it's a terrible way to go, right? Thinking that that we could either like a statist, like force down laws on the world to create peace, or even the good intentions of like a Twitter's Jack, right? Thinking well, maybe Bitcoin will help implement peace if we can get a decentralized money. If man is still dead in his sins, then there will be no hope in the world, right? So we need absolutely first and foremost the gospel to take dead men and bring them back to life, and to have regenerate people. But then as an added benefit, we want free money. We want protections because we know that we're still sinful, right? We're not in our final state, and these things exist. Like men are tempted to print money away or move their property marker into their neighbor's yard. So Bitcoin is a tool against that, but it's not our ultimate hope. It's in context in this Christian worldview.
Yes, exactly. And I think I was rambling a bit earlier when I was trying to get my thoughts around this. But if you set it in the Christian worldview, that thing that you mentioned about people wanting to move their neighbor's property marker onto their own, it's like the reason Bitcoin is what it is in the first place is because we're living in a fallen creation, right? I mean, in an ideal world where we would have perfect honesty, let's say the new world in our state of glorification, when we were created anew, we wouldn't need Bitcoin at all. Like you could probably still have a public ledger, and anybody is open to go and put in their money, and everybody would be honest. You wouldn't go and erase someone else and transfer it to you. You wouldn't need this entire verification layer and the decentralization and proof of work. You wouldn't need it because everyone would be honest. So the reason Bitcoin is what it is even though people would deny it, it is the case that the default state of man is that we are inherently evil and we hate the things of God, right?
Right.
So let's give the best case scenario. Let's give these people like let's give Jack Dorsey. I don't think he's going to watch this, but on the off chance that he does, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Everyone adopts Bitcoin everywhere.
Yep.
Okay. Suddenly, it's 1 billion times harder to take your neighbor's property marker and put it on yours.
Yes.
But what do we have? We have billions of people envying other people and coveting their possessions, but they just can't take it. That they just can't go and steal it. It's like in Islam, if you catch someone stealing, you cut off the person's hands. All you have now is you still have a thief that can't steal. So you still have the sinner living in the state of wanting the possessions of other people, but they just can't steal them. And is that really a utopia? Is that where we want to be? Is because that's the best case scenario that Bitcoin can give us if you think that this is your hope. But anything you want to add on that?
No, I just think you're absolutely right. It's hopeless. Like the following secular humanism to its end, to its chief end, is still you don't want to go there. It's a bad world. It doesn't like you said, it doesn't address this core problem. Like you said, Bitcoin ultimately is addressing an issue, or it's attempting to remedy the state of the fallen world. It's sin, right? There's sin in the world. There's theft, and this is a defense against that. But men having wicked hearts, hating God, which is our default state, like will not correct those things on their own. The best hope for the world is the gospel, for men to be transformed, for them to take their heart of stone and be given a heart of flesh, and to now love their neighbor, and to seek their benefits before their own, right? So that's what we need in the world. And like you said, we I think it's Bitcoin is a tool in our toolkit while we're on that road, while the gospel advances, and well, like it says in Corinthians, that he must reign until death. Oh man, I'm botching the quote. 1 Corinthians 15:25. Oh my goodness, I've lost it. We'll have to look it up. We'll tag it in the show notes. It's an important verse, but you know what I'm saying? Yeah, it needs to be in its appropriate place. I agree, Arnie.
All right. Yeah, so I think what happened here is actually, if I look at the order of the topics that we have here, we kind of already moved into the next topic, which is the ethics of Bitcoin.
Right.
When we were speaking about theft, and we earlier spoke about property rights, and this is something that I kind of try to develop in the article as well. Theft and property rights kind of go hand in hand for me. So if you look at the arguments that people are making on Bitcoin Twitter when it comes to granting people property rights in these countries where they don't necessarily have these property rights guaranteed by law or anything, why exactly should people have property rights? Why is it wrong for me to steal someone else's property? So that's I think where a part comes in. If I think about the ethics of Bitcoin, where these people are falling short, I think they're making the right arguments that we need to guarantee property rights, we need to protect our property, but why? Given a universe that is non-theistic, that's governed by a principle of chance, let's take atheism for an example. We're just matter in motion, right? That's the thing Jeff Durbin likes to say. We're matter in motion. We're atoms floating around. What exactly does it mean if you say that I own something? This is mine. In what way can one atom say that I own another atom? How is that
Right.
even possible? Like two material objects can't own each other. The idea of property is just incoherent in this materialistic universe. So what I then try to do is to show, on the Christian grounds, what we have is everything is created by the triune God, and he owns everything. It belongs to him.
Yeah.
And then he gives to each of us, or I might probably say better, he lends to each of us something in creation, whether it is a house, it might be money, it might be friends and family. So he gives us these things that we own, or I don't think you own friends and family, but I think the point still stands. He gives us property to make use of, to further the kingdom and to spread the gospel. Is that correct, Ben? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's right, like your property rights are so important, but they, in comparing the two, right, if you're an atheist, if you have that worldview, for example, then it's totally arbitrary that you die the death of arbitrariness. On a pragmatic level, you may want to argue that, well, these things it's best for society, or a utilitarian approach, or whatever spin you want to take on it. But when you peel that back far enough, eventually you come to this, well, why? Well, why does it ultimately matter? And it always dies the death of arbitrariness, because if the sum of what you are is only matter in motion, atoms bouncing around meaninglessly in the universe, then it matters not at all if you go into your neighbor's house and kill, steal, and destroy, take their stuff. Like who says, right? Like
Yeah.
at the end of the day, there is sound and fury signifying nothing in the world. And while it's very noble of you that you would try, in my worldview, there is no such thing as nobility in your worldview for you to do these things. So they have to come to this kind of haunting thought of like, well, I'm pursuing these things, but to no end. There is no, maybe there's a pragmatic approach for them, like it benefits me. Well, maybe it benefits the thief to come in and take your things. Like who's to say that one value is higher than the other? But in the Christian worldview, God is not a thief, and you've been you have secondary property rights to what God owns. Like, the earth is the Lord's, right? And so when you've been given property rights, God has decreed that your neighbor may not take what is yours.
Yes.
And that's why it's not wrong because you've violated me. It's wrong because you've sinned against God, and
Yes.
you've disobeyed the triune God of the universe, and you've stolen from his image bearer, and that's why it's wrong and it's immoral. But again, in the atheist worldview, who's to say why? I mean, why would those things matter? They couldn't possibly matter if you can't derive meaning and objectivity from a totally meaningless, world at its base. It's a link that gap you can't bridge. It's an endless chasm. Philosophical.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing that you mentioned there. When you take someone else's stuff, you ultimately sin against God because he is the one that allocated that part of creation to that individual in the first place.
Right.
So it's an act of rebelling against him and saying, but no, God made a mistake in giving that person X. I want X, so I'm going to take X for myself. And I don't really care what God thinks about it or not. So it's an act of rebellion, right?
Absolutely.
And then, moving on, now that we know how our property rights kind of works on a metaphysical level in the Christian worldview, if you think about the idea of theft, so you also kind of went into that when you spoke about, well, both of us spoke about us going and taking someone else's property and how that's an act of rebellion against God. On the person that owns a piece of property, right, given to him by his creator, do you think that person should put it to good use, right? I'm thinking about the parable. It's a bit difficult for me in English. I think I can recount it a bit better in my native tongue, but it's the parable where Jesus, the parable that Jesus tells about the servants and the gold coins, right? And he gives to each of the servants coins, and they need to go work with the coins and increase the value or increase the number of coins. And then the master comes back.
Talents.
Yeah, the talents, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he looks at them and he says, okay, what did you do? And this person increased his coins twofold, and so on and so forth. Do you think if you've been given something, you should put it to good use, and not kind of go and bury it, right? So the point that I'm trying to make is, if you've been given a piece of property, would it be sinful for you to neglect that piece of property? So let's say you've been given a car to take care of. Okay, so you've worked for your car and whatever, and then you just kind of leave it out on the street unlocked, so someone can come and take it. Is that something that is sinful on your part, or do you have an obligation to protect your property? Well, what do you think about that?
I think yes, right? Because like we've talked about, like I am a slave to Christ, right? I have been, every breath I take is a gift that I've been given, right? On my own, like I've earned nothing in this world except the good things that God would give me, right? And And so because of that, I owe, as God's creation and his image bearer, like I am to glorify God in all things. Now I fail at that every day, but like you said, nonetheless, like it is still our obligation as God's creation to glorify God. And so, like you said, the derivative of that would be, well, what I've been given, I'm a steward of, and I need to till the soil, right? I need to use what God's given me, as little or as much, right? Like we're not all given the same hand in this world, but God in his wisdom, right, handles that. But what I have been given, I absolutely, like, I will give an accounting for on the last day, right? So when I die, right, we're not like the heathen, right, where we think we're just going to go be eaten by worms in the ground. Like I have a soul, and everyone has a soul that is eternal, right? And we'll give an answer to the king on the last day about how we've used what we have. So absolutely, when you have property, you need to steward it, and you need to develop it, right, to the best of your ability, and to do the kingdom work that God's declared, right? We want to see the gospel advance, and the byproduct of that is peace, right? The byproduct of that is these material things that we see. It's not the final end or the chief end of the gospel, but it is when regenerate men go and they learn to love God's law instead of hate it, then society benefits, right? We have justice in our society, and people, they're benefited, their property is defended, all those things. So, but when you fail to do that, when you fail to take care of your property, you fail to love the law of God, then society is worse off for that. And then, we see these terrible things that are happening all the time. So yes, it's absolutely imperative. But what would you say that? Where were you going with that thought about property, and how would you relate that to Bitcoin?
I think where I was going is that in the Christian worldview, we firstly have a foundation for property rights.
Yeah.
We have a foundation for the objective evil of taking someone else's property.
Yeah.
And then we also have a reason, as Christians living in this world, to take the property that we've been given and to protect it as best as we could. Right.
Yes.
And my idea then was to bring that back to Bitcoin, where Bitcoin has been designed as a tool for us living in a fallen world to secure what we've been given, so
For
that
sure.
I can take some of the money that I've earned that ultimately has been given to me, and it would not be reckless of me to store it in something like Bitcoin. Would that be a debatable point given all the volatility that we're seeing going on?
Right.
Perhaps I don't know. I don't know. These are very raw thoughts, but I'm just thinking that in principle, what we have in Bitcoin is a tool that's supposed to be able to secure what we've been given, to make it so that someone unwanted with malicious intent can't come and touch what you've been given.
Right.
So in that sense, it serves us well as Christians as a tool that we can use to protect our property. So that's what I was going for there. Any comments on your side on that?
Yeah, I think when it's good stewardship, right? Like if the money, like Michael Saylor talked about in some of his interviews, like he realized his company, like the cash they had on hand was this like melting ice cube on his balance sheet because of inflation, right? And because of the printing of money. And so as a Christian, there's good ways to invest your money, right? Bitcoin isn't the only way, but we would think this is absolutely prudent, right? If I just from a very basic, value proposition of Bitcoin as a store of value, like if I have one money that has no cap, right? It can be printed into oblivion. My portion, my ratio of like what I own to all the money in circulation is continually shrinking. But if I own a piece of Bitcoin, right, I have let's say 100,000 Satoshis of this limited, 21 million Bitcoin supply, that there will never be more. Right. And so the Bible even talks about like a good man will leave an inheritance for his children's children, right? For you to, it's really not akin to like burying it in the sand, right? You're being wise and investing, like going and buying that field when you find a treasure in it, putting it in there, and knowing that this is going to pull a return. Like, I know it's the safest bet in the world that governments will, to, like they've always done, continue to debase their currencies. But I think prudent Christians, I think there's absolutely something to say about storing the fruit of your labor, your economic energy, in something that cannot be inflated away. Like, why would we not want that for our children, for, to 1,000 generations, right? For them in the future. And then, right, for investing in your local church, for tithing, for all these different things, like seeing the kingdom advance. Like, there's huge benefits for this long term. So I think it is absolutely prudent on our end. And there's objections to work through. People are nervous about Bitcoin, and those things are answered elsewhere. But yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. I think it's wise, and you are not being the wicked servant who hid it in the ground when you put your economic energy in Bitcoin. I think largely long term, regardless of the volatility, those things will be a huge benefit in the future. So we'll see. We'll see how it works out.
Yeah. I think those were, thanks for that, Ben. I think that's a nice development of the thought that we had there. Um, you know, there's a ton more that we can talk about. I mean, we didn't even get into the concept of inflation and the ethics of inflation. And I mean, you mentioned governments debasing their currencies, and initially you also mentioned money printing and everything. But I think we're a bit out of time now. I did try to put a hard cap of 60 minutes on this conversation. Otherwise, I've been in conversations that went on for 2 hours, but then it's just a bit too long. But I'd definitely be open to continuing this conversation. Maybe we can then pinpoint a bit more on an issue like inflation, if you'd be keen for something like that. And then I'd also like to invite you, if you ever feel if you ever feel the need to write something on Bitcoin and the Christian worldview, the Apologetics Central platform is open to publishing your article if you'd want to, of course.
Yeah.
And yeah, man, this conversation was pretty awesome. It's nice to meet people that kind of think like you, that are of a similar age as you
I
are.
agree.
I mean, how many reformed presuppositionalist Bitcoin enthusiasts are there, man? I mean, there might be.
We're a small group. I don't know if we're gonna blow up anytime soon, but there are people out there, right? It is a gift. It's kind of, I feel like I'm no fun at parties anymore, because when you see the world this way, not that I'm a bright guy, I've never been the smartest guy in the room, but when you understand the myth of neutrality, you understand that kind of these other worldviews are maybe pragmatic but baseless at their foundation, or they're not accounted for. When you see that you're like the fiat standard is not working, that you're you saving in your bank account, like you have to gamble in the stock market or real estate market to save for your future, like it puts you in kind of a weird contrarian camp. And like you said, there's not a lot of us right now, but I'm hopeful. I mean, being a post millennialist, right? It's the eternal optimist, right? Like Jesus is king, and he is reigning now and ruling over the world. And so, what do we have to fear, right? Like maybe not in my lifetime. I don't know if things will get better, pragmatically for me, but I know that the gospel will be victorious in the end. And that's what excites me. And so seeing these tools that come up along the way that we can use, it's awesome. And yeah, I don't know, Arnie, I'm thrilled. Thank you so much for having me. I hope you continue to write, and that we, stay connected, man. I want to see more articles from you. it was amazing. I really appreciated your work and you having me on.
Yeah, thanks for the kind words, Ben. And yeah, it was also a great pleasure meeting you. And I'm sure we'll stay in contact on social media.
All
Thanks.
right.
Cool. Thanks, man.